Hello and welcome. I'm Jeremy Shane, and I'm representing the executive committee of the Urban Design Panel today and introducing our excellent presentation on the Center for Tribal Nations. The Urban Design Panel, or UDP, is sponsored jointly by the American Institute of Architects, American Planning Association, and American Society of Landscape Architects, and is composed of professionals from these three organizations with a shared interest in urban design. The AIA is generally offers us this Zoom opportunity here. And so in addition to our monthly email announcement, our panel presentations can be found on the AIA Oregon event calendar, as well as the AIA newsletters Thursdays at 3. Participation in the event makes you a panel member. Welcome. We encourage you to sign up for information about the panel presentations for every Tuesday of the month. When you register for any UDP presentations, you'll be included in upcoming invitations, so look forward to those. We also encourage you to send any interesting future panel presentations to Kathleen Windland, and she can put her email in the chat if you need to. These panel presentations are recorded as a Vimeo file, so everybody agrees to that as you enter we're recording, and they will be found in the link on the AIA website. This presentation will be approximately 30 to 40 minutes, be followed by Q&A. Please put your questions and comments in the chat box, and we'll go from there. Erin Riom will be managing the chat function. Hopefully she's able, not coughing, but everyone's kind of working through some stuff, but we're happy to, please enter them whenever you want so we can get them going and we can be ready for Q&A when we kick off on that. Any follow-up questions can be sent directly to today's presenters via their email, and I'll ask Jeff to enter an email for that. But with that, I want to turn the meeting over to presenters Jeff Robertson and Marissa Ahern-Crabb for today's presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. Me and Marissa are very happy to be here today representing the Northwest Native Chamber, Native Roots, and Earthwest Design as consultants on this. And we welcome you to this presentation on the Center for Tribal Nations. This has been 2 years worth of planning and engagement to get us to this point, and we're excited to show you the progress today as we approach, the equinox and the spring equinox, and a new bloom, a new growth of, a new type of building for Indigenous people in downtown Portland on the eastern side of the Willamette River. And we're excited to share our background today. We're going to give you some background feedback on tribes of the Northwest, the importance of the cultural relevance of this place, this intent, the impact on Indigenous people across the U.S., the Pacific Northwest, and Oregon specifically. And then we're hope to speak to potentially a new moment in time for looking at a modern, Indigenous designed, Indigenous led, community-based project for a mixed-use, modern example of an Indigenous architecture. So with that said, we hope you have any questions you engage with today. We welcome that. And our goal is to build a more collaborative community. That's the hope around this project, and bring Indigenous knowledge into the forefront of sustainable resilience thinking. So Marissa, I'm going to hand it over to you. Give a little background on yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. My name is Marissa Ahern-Crabb. I'm a citizen of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, so was born and raised in Central Oregon. I am currently working on the Center for Tribal Nations through my company, Native Roots Design and Development. And so I've joined the team as the Director of Strategic Operations and Economic Development, and I've had the opportunity to work with Jeff and a few other team members from the Chamber on this project for the last few years. And my background is in architecture, environmental design, as well as community and economic development. And so this project for me personally is really exciting, being from Oregon, and the opportunity to see something like this in Portland is really special, especially growing up as a young Native girl wanting to pursue architecture and having no example of Native architecture or Native architects, seeing something like this in Portland, I think would be really, really powerful. And I will pass it to Jeff, and then I'll dive back in a second.
As I stated, I'm Jeff Roberts. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation from Oklahoma, Eastern Oklahoma. So I'm an architect, planner, and have a deep background in sustainable design, regenerative design thinking. I've formerly served on the AIA Las Vegas board. I've been working in the Portland area for about 11 years. I now have my own company called Earthwise Design, and really honored to have worked on this project off and on over the past with as a principal formerly at Sarah, but now as the senior project manager for the Center for Tribal Nations, and thrilled to be moving into now design selection for the next round of designers for this project. The work that you'll see to date has been completed by us as a collaborative team through this engagement, and we're excited to share what we have today as we move to the next phases of scope. So with that said, we have a strong belief in that to be native to a place, we need to learn to speak its language. This came right out of braiding sweetgrass. We need to understand the context of this place, what's been its influence, and this revolves to regenerative thinking around the story of place. There has always been people here. Sometimes they've been pushed off and moved to other places and colonialized. That's what we hope to try to repair at some level. The significance of this land is incredibly important for you to understand. You need to understand the disparity and inequity that has occurred across our country, across North America. And a good example of this is look at the amount of historic villages and different languages that were represented along the Northwest in a lot of levels, right? This was all the way down, and the waterways were the interconnective tissue between these communities, connecting these different tribes together. What you see now, which is sadly part of our government, our approach, is these groupings where different tribes have been forced or assimilated together in smaller portions of land through colonializations to move around through development. That has caused this deeper economic, social, health, indicators in Portland compared to other countries. This is more devastating in a lot of ways to our community. Indigenous people have been violently removed from their homelands, and there's centuries of assimilation policies and intentional underfunding of education and healthcare to serve these. This was a method, a movement to gain more critical, important pieces of land that Native Americans have lived on for eons, centuries, and moved them away from them so development can occur. So with that said, there's a unique point in time that's occurring right now. And that point in time is based around Native Americans are being recognized more than they ever have in the past, mostly in political roles. Deb Howland as the Department of Interior. There's a new perception of embracing natives of this place, right? So this is a comment from President Biden and his administration, and I'm not getting into politics, but the point around this is this policy was to represent and honor hundreds of tribal nations that continue to exercise their inherent sovereignty as vital members of an overlifting system of governments in the United States. Many sovereign nations. These are, and you should know this and understand this. They're sovereign nations because they're government to government discussions. And these were decided on eons ago by the United States government and negotiated through the War Department. So reservations are a negotiation, a treaty of such to different sovereign governments. And we need to understand that through centuries of violence and oppression, Native people remain resilient and proud. Today, Native Americans are essential to the fabric of the United States. So as we look at this, the one thing that I want to share with you is learn to understand how Native people have been viewed in the past, how they're viewed today, and the way we hope they're viewed tomorrow. So when you look at this diagram, starting at the top in the pre-contact of 1.5 to 20 million indigenous people lived in North America. In 1492 was the first contact with, settlers. Colonialization started, and that's carried all the way up into 1928. The point around even owning land, that doesn't even exist in actually the premise of indigenous people's world. We live with property lines, boundaries, edges, and controls, state borders. Most of these are manufactured at some level by pseudo-government agencies. Indigenous people don't believe in owning land. They believe nobody can own the land. This is an important point of reference for understanding how they respect what the land gives community and society. In 1828, 1887, we started the removal and the reservation treaty period. We started to move people away from their natural homelands. That's why you won't see reservations today in states like Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Arkansas. There were Ohio, there were native people there. They were all assimilated and removed from their homelands for Western expansion to actually be moved to Oklahoma. In 1887, 1934, the assimilation allotment period, there was fear in the United States government that tribes, even living together in close proximity, created a threat to the government. So what they tried to do is break them up and give them allotments of land, periods for farming, cultivating. This was a part of breaking tribes apart, breaking families apart. Then you've got the Indian reorganization period, 34 to 45, the termination of starting canceling reservations. And this is the start of actually starting to stand mineral rights, oil, gold, silver, copper, starting to move Indians off land that actually were prominent for those. You can see this in The Killers of the Flower Moon, the movie around the Osage. The serfdom and self-determination period is a start to move cities from reservation land into urban areas. That created refuge cities. Portland became one of those. San Francisco did. Minneapolis did. Seattle. Today, there's a nation-to-nation period where governments are communicating tribal to tribal. The Northwest is one of the richest tribal engagements of nation to nation discussing issues around indigenous people. So the point we hope today is to rebuild communities, families around architecture and the intent. So, Marissa, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So to build off of Jeff, a little bit of the history, we think it's really important before talking about the Center for Tribal Nations to really ground this project in the significance of what it means for Native people as a whole. With that, you can see with a couple of these maps, the 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States. That does not include some state recognized tribes and some tribes that, as Jeff mentioned, were terminated in the past. So there's more. You take an example of my own tribe, Warm Springs, we're counted as one federally recognized tribes, and that was 3 tribes that were put on one reservation together. So I like to point that out, that 574 is only a portion of the tribal representation that you see throughout the country. You can go to the next slide, Jeff. With this project being located in Portland, there's a particular focus and interest on the 9 tribes of Oregon. All of these tribes have their own unique histories and ties to the land, but with the Center for Tribal Nations being located in Oregon, these tribes are a really important part of our visioning process and making sure that their voices are heard and represented and that they have a really meaningful voice and contribution to this project. can go one more. And in particular, with the project being located along the banks of the Willamette River, we've really focused on the kind of intersection of the Columbia River and the Willamette River, which we'll get into in a little bit, but the historical significance of these waterways for trade and commerce, and the history of kind of the lands, both from a natural perspective of the water and the life that it gave to these tribes historically and through today, but also the economic opportunities that present itself with these waterways and trade routes. Today, with the project being located in Portland, it's important to note the diverse urban native population that Portland itself has. In the greater Portland region, there are over 89,000 American Indians and Alaska Natives that live in the region, and these represent over 380 tribal affiliations from across the country, as well as kind of the diverse and vast Native population. There is also a really big concentration of tribal, intertribal, and Native organizations that have their headquarters in Portland. And so those are really important communities and populations that we're really focused on, of looking at what is the urban population in Portland today, as well as what are the Oregon and regional tribes with strong ties to this site. With the significance of the river as a whole, both historically and today, we think it's important to point out that there is significant indigenous, traditional, cultural, and ecological knowledge that are really being incorporated into our thought process of what this project represents. To kind of build off of some of the quotes that Jeff shared before, the White House has issued a memorandum recognizing indigenous knowledge as one of the many important bodies of knowledge that contributes to the scientific, technical, social, and economic advancements of the United States, and to our collective understanding of the natural world. And then this is a picture of Celilo Falls. We like to point that out, of the history of it and how that connects to both the Columbia and the Willamette. This is a picture pre-dams of the resource that this was for tribes in the past, and why the treatment of the rivers and the waterways are still so important to us today.
And this is a good segue reference. Just if you don't know the history of Celilo Falls and the impact, this was culturally devastating to the tribes of this area, right? Their life source was built around fishing. So if you want a good reference, you want to understand more about this impact on what the intent of dams, and I get what it tried to do in creating hydroelectric power, transportation, but this was devastating to a community, and there's still intergenerational trauma around the loss of this area. So as a reference to this, one thing that I want to talk to you about again around Portland development as a whole, and how it's different in looking at indigenous people. Most of the general world looks at the pursuit of economic development as an end game in itself, right? What is the primary focus of creating opportunities for individual human beings to provide for themselves and families to satisfy a quality of life? This creates the city grids, the components, the city blocks that we turn into pieces of property that we sell and trade over time, right? It's still a place that is organically shaped by the waterways, the mountainways, and that's what this grid an example. But different thinking occurs when you deal with indigenous people in tribal nations. Tribal nations think about economic is, and always has been, a vital means to a greater ends. The ends are rooted in tribal sovereignty, governments, communities that can stand on their own, their cultures, their life ways. Ceremonies are sacred to them. Kinship and clan relations are stewardship of the natural world, in strengthening and sustaining these fundamental and distinct attributes of indigenous people for generations to come. One of the things that I always like to share with people that are new to working with indigenous people and in these places, it's never about a project. It's never about a building. It's never about turning the keys to something to somebody else. It's always about relationships. And if you want to work with indigenous people, you need to be willing to sacrifice yourself to engage in a meaningful way in the relationship. And you also need to be prepared. The relationship is lifetime. Like I said, when you complete a project in a building, you may walk away from it, you go on to the next. But in indigenous, working with indigenous people, it's about relationships, and they're timeless. So we're going to jump in now to Center for Tribal Nations and this case study for collaborative learning. This is upwards of 2 years of work to get us to this point, working with many different advisory members. We'll talk about that in a minute. But here's our vision statement. Dreamt into existence for decades, the Center for Tribal Nations celebrates and catalyzes the power of indigenous peoples' cultures and presence on the river. So this project and the stewardship, I'm going to hand over to Marissa.
Thank you. A major focus of this project and the significance of the Center for Tribal Nations is really this commitment of it being Native-led through and through. The project is currently being led by the Northwest Native Chamber. The Northwest Native Chamber is the largest provider of technical assistance for Native entrepreneurs in the region. It's important to note that in 2023, they actually expanded from the Oregon Native American Chamber to the Northwest Native Chamber and are now serving indigenous communities in Washington, Idaho, as well as continuing their services in Oregon. So they've been a really great fit for the vision of this project and the way that it aligns with their 3 pillars as a nonprofit. Their organization really focuses all of their services around education and growth, relationship building, and economic justice and transformation, which we feel the Center for Tribal Nations is really representative of all of those core values of the Chamber. The project, as Jeff mentioned, has been years in the making. Important to note that for decades, the Native population in Portland, as well as around the region, has really placed a focus on a need for a gathering place here in Portland, where they have a place where they belong and have that sense of community. With that, when the project kind of got some footing in recent years, it was really important to form an advisory committee and to really focus this project on community engagement as kind of the foundation for everything that we've done. The community engagement process has allowed us to form an advisory committee of 25 people who represent tribal council members of different Oregon and regional tribes, some of the urban Native organizations and leaders in the Native community here in Portland, all came together to really learn from the past and previous efforts for these gathering places. All the projects never were kind of seen through completion, to learn from those experiences and form the new vision for what the Center for Tribal Nations could be. The project kind of facilitation has been led by Native consultants, and community engagement has really allowed for the foundation for everything that Jeff and I will present next. And so we really want to highlight, I think on the next slide, it kind of shows the representation of all the different tribes. And as we kind of spoke to the importance of the collaboration of the 9 tribes of Oregon, as well as regional tribes and those urban populations together, have really informed what this vision for the project is. Go to the next slide. So a lot of the feedback has really been grounded and based in the history of the project itself. The history of the land and the site. The Portland area is once a thriving place of trade and commerce for First Peoples of the land. It was a major goal of ours to be able to document that history and be able to kind of interpret that into a modern opportunity to restore a lot of that trade and commerce. And Jeff is going to present more on kind of the values of the project. There's a number of current partners that have allowed this process to happen to date. The 2020 Oregon Metro looking at that, the Metro grant, which I believe is the 2040 Equitable Development Grant, is really what gave this project its launching point. That was what allowed us to work with the advisory committee, form the vision document that was created, that is serving as the basis for this next phase of work that we are getting into. The collaboration of the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians was very significant. They were the original stewards of this project, and collaborated with the chamber to transfer the kind of next phase of the project into the hands of the chamber, as well as working with CRIPFIC, which is the Columbia River Intertribal Fishing Commission, to be able to represent those Columbia River tribes.
And I do want to just interrupt real quick, as Marissa has been in very unique roles here. She's sat on the Oregon Native American Chamber. She transferred to Northwest Native Chamber, and then she is also an advisory committee member, and she had to resign from all those so she can join us now as a consultant because she was so valuable with her insight. But she's had her position involved in all of these. So as this is one of the things that we've talked about, this kind of disparity and equity that's caused impact on Indigenous people, we hope to change that with this project and move that forward. So I'm going to let Marissa talk about the economic impact.
Yeah, the goal with the project is for it to be self-sustaining while expanding economic and social opportunities for Native people in Portland and throughout the Pacific Northwest. We see this as a really unique opportunity for economic impact across the board at the large scale of what it would mean for this to be a tribally owned and operated development, as well as what it would mean to have an urban, centrally located building in downtown Portland that can house Native-owned businesses, entrepreneurs, and resources for the tribal population in Portland to really be able to thrive. I think the next, I'll let Jeff. Oh, you're on mute, Jeff. But I'll pass it to Jeff to kind of get into some of the design elements.
Sorry. As we talked about this project being place-based and economically driven, here are the challenges that we've had to go through to talk about in Portland for Indigenous people. We lack a community gathering space for ceremony and events. There's a loss of language and culture going on. Language is a key driver in storytelling, and this loss occurs every day. With each passing day, an elder passes. We have colonized economies that have been based and been a disservice to Indigenous people. And then we want to move beyond tokenism. Way too much, scene of teepees and feathers and this, that is important in regalia and intent, but there's longhouses, there's coastal tribes, the plains tribes are important, but all of these are, again, perceptions and then there's only 5 brick and mortars that are owned by Indigenous people currently in Portland. We want to change that. So with that, here's our opportunities. We want to create a new urban ceremonial grounds in downtown Portland. We want to look at innovative audio recording studio for Indigenous music, sound, language labs. We want to look at regenerative economies instead of colonialized. We want an abundance of visibility and a statement that Indigenous people are still living in the city and they're here. And then we want to increase tourism to Indigenous places around Greater Oregon, Washington, Idaho, the region. We want to create tourism to Oregon and to Portland centric. And we hope that this becomes a model that people will come from around North America to see the city of Portland being a collaborative partner in an engaged Indigenous result in a project, so they can model the lessons learned from this and other indigenous communities that are underserved around this country in North America. So this is one of our advisory committees, Sandy B. Allman, and this statement kind of wraps up who we're trying to do. We haven't had, and what our community has been asking for about 60 years, is one space to gather, a space that, whether it be cultural, ceremony, teaching, or meeting, things like that, this has been our long-standing goal. This is not a project that has emerged in the last few years. So why here? Why the OMSI district? This is an opportunity for historical displacements to chance to rebuild a thriving community along a place to reconnect with the river and the ecosystem in this district, and having a collaborative partner like OMSI, Metro, Prosper Portland, recognized nationally for leading and learning through education. That's the benefit of us being in the OMSI district. We hope we're able to lead a process to create a new community fabric with OMSI that is indigenous based. There's a lot of places you can go in this country and find Little Italy, Germantown, Chinatown, those type of things, even our own city. Tell me where you can go and find an indigenous town, Native American community. It's not there. Portland has the opportunity to lead that approach. The vision is this. We want to restore and revive a Native presence. It becomes really important to bring Native communities back to the Willamette 200 years in response to a history of displacement, disenfranchisement, and cultural erasure. That's our hope. We want a resilient building for tomorrow. We want to establish a gathering place. The Center for Nations is a platform for cultural exchange and educational opportunities. We want to be a cultural embassy of community gathering for Native people, tribal and intertribal organizations who live, work, and visit the Portland metro region. The other components of the vision: increase access. We want the CTN to address social, economic inequity head on, providing space to house cultural offices, educational, health, housing resources. That is our mixed use approach on the building. Enable consolidation of office space for Native, tribal, intertribal organizations, and allow the community to enjoy the benefits of proximity, reducing cost, improving access to services and opportunities. And lastly, we want to be an economic driver. We want to create self-sustaining, expanding economic, social opportunities for Native in Portland and throughout the Pacific Northwest. So with that said, here's our guiding principles as we move to the design solutions that we have to date for now. We want to listen to the people, listen to the place, listen to the process. Honor the generations before, and honor, most importantly, the generations to come in a larger connected landscape. Respect the land, this living place, as an integrated natural cultural landscape. Engage, create accessible opportunities for people to engage with each other in the natural world, and steward the landscape to a healthy balance of all living things that can adapt and evolve with the vision of waterways. And then reconnect the river, the stream landscape to the indigenous cultures of the Northwest and beyond, physically, spiritually, emotionally. This is all rooted in indigenous thought and wisdom, from the smallest living thing to the largest, as in the Cascades, all of these having names and meaning. This thought process at every scale has evolved us into the thinking around this. Human-centric component, community and economic development, stewardship, and experience. This is our indigenous thoughts and wisdom, all in creating the Center for Tribal Nation. This is our value statement. I'm not going to read through all these, but I want you to understand the 4 value statements that we're using to create the architecture, the landscape, the placemaking. It's human-centric. It's physical, it's mental, it's emotional. It's stewardship. It's around water, energy, and ecology. It's about an experience. It's about well-being, the materials, and the comfort of this place. And then the community and economic development is around finance, equity, community, and knowledge. But these are our driving values for the design for the project. And along any body of water, it's a sacred space. our usual and custom spaces, we're recreating that sacred space. And although it may not be sacred to non-natives, to us it is. So we need to do what we can do to help it heal, to make it sacred to us. Again, even though we're within an industrialized area, we need to bring that out. The river brought us here. The river has been our home for many, many centuries. It's the home to you today. We want to reconnect the river through this. And part of it is this asset-based management for a positive change. Move from deficit-minded to asset. We have resources that are important. Embrace diversity and inclusion. Foster collaboration and partners sharing for a mutual gain. Create real sustainable change, and then foster and teach regenerative practices. So with that said, here's the principles that we're going to go into the architecture with. It's asset-based, it's place-based, it's relational, it's working inclusively, and it's citizen-led. This is a new arising on the eastern shore of the Willamette for downtown Portland. This is the start of the Center for Tribal Nations. These renderings that I'm about ready to show you are placeholders. They're placeholders for fundraising, for grant, building marketing, and also building the momentum that we need to push this through. We're on a very unique opportunity to about ready to select our design teams for the next phase of this that will be indigenous led. We're very excited about that opportunity, but these are the designs that have been led by our team with some really great guidance by Brian Stevens and his visualization skills to express what the Center for Tribal Nations might be as a placeholder for tomorrow. This is the sunrise on the Center for Tribal Nations. The tall tower in the back is a mixture of hospitality and indigenous housing. We'll have a rooftop restaurant at the top overlooking the river. The campfire that you see in the center sits on a podium. That is an urban powwow ground. Okay. One of our tribal elders said we'd like to have a powwow ground that has all the flags of all the nations of this country. That's all the flags around the powwow ground. The tower to the right is a workplace tower. It's actually designed for entrepreneurial business, clinics, counseling, new office spaces. The podium will have a central utility plant in it for the district. We're looking at one layer of subterranean parking and then a cup that will be braced in that. And then we're looking at an intertribal food hall, cultural spaces for carving, totem engagement. And then, as we move, there's the daytime shot. Down below is a shared space between OMSI for educational purposes, engagement. We're looking at new types of approaches on urban streetscapes, landscapes that are native based for plant material that has healing potential with indigenous people and learning around how to grow indigenous foods. But we hope to push the boundaries of a new approach to modern indigenous architecture. The canyon, the sweeps, the shapes up the central kind of plaza is designed around canyons, streetways, the wind movement, moving up through these canyons, the breezeways and the way the water. You can see the turtle art there on the platform. The greeting to the canyon is the turtle there in a tile medallion. As I said, the housing hospitality towers on the left, you can see the powwow grounds. And this is the approach on the right up to the powwow grounds, bringing in water, stormwater collection, using natural ferns, native plant material to actually create these biophilic experiences around, non-rhythmic sensory stimuli, engagement around change of patterns, sun, wind, connections. There's the same renderings as we move to a sunset and early evening, bringing in native art and expressions around embracing this grounded in place, but an ephemeral movement around the wind, the sky, the clouds, and the air at the top. This is looking back towards downtown Portland. This is from the east. The large towers that you'll see, the large sky lobbies, as we call them on the left, also have been inspired by a lot of our native advisors as even morning prayer towers to the morning sun coming up as places to connect for the new dawn of a new day. And the beauty of this place and being able to set in this location creates conferencing centers on the left with the place to have indigenous meals on the right, overlooking the Western Hills at sunset. We want native art throughout the project and engaged. This is still in work. So we're, as I said, this is one of our last slides and we're wrapping up of how this project can influence our community, you moving this, but we don't have furniture in this, it's in work, but this is a view from the restaurant and what it might look across the south waterfront, down onto the river and across the OMSI district. Really organic shapes and intent. And this is our sunset shot from the front door of OMSI. As you can see again, the building is designed to kind of reflect, change the mood, the temperature, the intent throughout the day. So I'll leave you with one last sharing and then we'll have questions. This is a little video that we've created.
As this is playing, I just want to add to or emphasize, as Jeff was showing all of these renderings, that this is really inspired by the feedback of the advisory committee. And so it's taking all of the advisory committee's comments on things like the use of natural materials or not having sharp edges or incorporating indigenous plants, and kind of taking all of those ideas and turning it into a concept that we could use to get us into the next phase of the project.
And we know this will not be the final project, but there is a lot of thought. There's been very purposeful decisions put into this graphic, this intent, to create inspiration for our new design teams, to create inspiration for our tribal advisory committees, tribal EVOs, different tribal governments. And I am crossing my fingers. In the last 6 months, we've started rolling this out. We've got really no negative feedback from anybody in the tribal community. We've heard more things. This feels right. This is a respect of the landscape and the place. This feels modern and a great expression of who we want to be. We hope our children, own this place, engage this. And we hope the community of Portland embraces a piece of architecture like this, because one of the reasons the city of Portland is here is because indigenous people were here. They learned to maximize the land of this place and the intent. It's time to reconnect those people to this place. And this will take you down into the powwow grounds. And this is on a podium on purpose, so we can actually control access during very sacred ceremonial moments. We want to invite everybody into this facility, but there are sacred ceremonies that will occur here that need to be private, that need to be separate. You will still be able to hear the sound, the singing, the dancing of this place, but you may not be able to visually see those moments. That doesn't mean that's for all, but that's it. So with that said, I would ask you to, on behalf of the Chamber, Native Roots, Earthwise Design, we sincerely thank you and appreciate the time you've committed to us today in engaging this new project on the horizon on the East Bank. This is the Center for Tribal Nations, and we're open for questions. Love to hear anything you have.
Thank you so much, Jeff and Marissa. And we do have a number of questions that have been pouring into the chat. And just as a quick reminder, feel free to type your questions in the chat, or if you prefer to verbalize those, you're welcome to raise your Zoom hand and we'll call on you in order. So we did have one question just asking for clarification on the architecture firm. And I think, Jeff, you mentioned that the renderings here are placeholders. And I think you're in the process of still selecting a design team for this. Is that correct?
We are. The rendering that you see are based out of some conceptual sketches that we as a team have created. For those of you Nice to see so many old colleagues here. And for those of you who know my hand sketches, these were built out of some really sketches around place. And we did about a dozen of them. And 2 or 3 of them rose to the surface. And then we started tuning those. And with the help of the collaborative, or with the help of Native Roots, Renee Perry, the Chamber's guidance, Chamber advisors, me and Brian Stevens, a good colleague of mine, helped create these renderings, and they have given us so much legwork. They've given us so many opportunities to move forward in this thinking. In all honesty, I spent 2 years having nervous twitches, not being able to sketch on this, and it was really good. It was really good for me not to do that. But once you're seeing 2 years of dumping onto the page now. And like I said, this has a shelf life. It will be limited, but we're excited to bring on new design teams. And a few of them have joined us here today on this call. It's good to see them. I'm thrilled to see them here. So, but we know there's a transition on the horizon.
And I'll add to that and just say, a big goal of the chamber is to allow this project to be native led through every step of the process and through every kind of pillar of the project. And so that has been a big focus for us in the selection of the new design team. It will be native led, and that has been really important for the chamber to be able to lay out what those kind of expectations and how we wanted to move this project forward into the next phase of design. And so as Jeff, mentioned, the designs and the renderings that you're seeing were very much based on all of the feedback of the advisory committee, and they really led that process. And so this has been a really powerful tool that Jeff has, been able to create for us to be able to kind of further share this vision on the project. But we also acknowledge that the native designers that are coming in, we want them to be able to go through their full process as well. So that will be kind of the next exciting phase of all of this.
Great. You did have a comment in there, Jeff, by the way, saying, who needs another design team? Because you guys are great. So kudos to you. Another question, can you expand a little bit more about the asset-based approach in the development and design process?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we spend a lot of times looking at challenges and problems that set us back. That's a deficit-based mindset. It's like, poor me, these are the things that set me back. Listen, we have an opportunity for a new piece of land in an amazing climate, right? We have changes that are out there, right? And we can look at climate change and the impacts on weather in this, but you know what? How do we adapt to it? How do we teach future generations? So that premise is actually finding the positive. And as I said, everything you see in this design, it's not designed for a singular purpose. It's designed for multiple solutions around design, climate, solar, protection, gain, wind collection, gathering, sound, sensory. All of these different components are coming together specifically for the design decision. That's the point of the asset-based. Find the positives, build on those, enhance them, and make them serve multiple design decisions along the process.
Yeah. I'll add a little bit to that as well. I think, an important kind of lens that we've looked at this through is that the assets as viewed by the Native community are going to be very different than what is traditionally seen in design. And so being able to kind of have that as a framework as we work through this project allows us for the indigenous community to be able to define what the assets are that we base everything off of.
Great. We have a number of questions in the chat asking if you can elaborate a little bit more about the connection to the river and what that's going to look and feel like.
Yeah, that one's a little bit unique. It is absolutely important that we have a connection to the river. That's part of this building, okay? So OMSI sits between us and the river. There's different sites in the OMSI district that has access to the river, but this site fit the best for the program and to reach indigenous people that are scattered in the 4-state regions that come to conferencing from other reservations. So this site has, in the OMSI, one of the unique sites to have parking, and that's to serve indigenous people that are outside of the urban context. We still want connection to the river. We're in partnership right now. We're working a deal out with the City of Portland Water Bureau, because the Bull Run easement, you guys may know this, you may not. I didn't know this till meeting with the Water Bureau today. There are 7 pipelines now serving the west side of downtown Portland. None of those are seismically viable. In a Cascadia event, we cut off all water to west side. So the Bull Run easement, they're digging a new pipeline under the river that will be seismically stable. That's a federal mandate. So we're working with the Water Bureau to share our 40-foot easement with their additional 40-foot easement on the north side of our boundary to create the Bull Run pipeline to go under the river. Along with that, they've actually offered us to partner that could be an area where our canoe carving could go, totem carving, an indigenous agricultural landscape could go in that easement zone. So this is a naturalistic zone that's in the easement in partnership with the Water Bureau. So that's one of our big drivers around the infrastructure and the connection around that placemaking. And I got long-winded, Aaron. What was the question again? Sorry.
I can add to it as well. We also are working very closely with OMSI, with this being a part of the OMSI district redevelopment. And so working really closely with OMSI and with the Waterfront Education Park plans to see, how this site can coordinate with the Waterfront Education Park, whether that's through signage or pathways for our site to that Waterfront Education Park, as well as thinking through some of the infrastructure and road changes of what becomes the access points to the river from the site. So we're very much looking into those opportunities to both connect to the river visually, but physically as well.
Great. Kind of semi-related to that, to a certain extent, also a question about the intent of education for non-native users of the site. And you both talked a little bit about some of the spaces, closing off for private events at some point, but could you elaborate a little bit more on how much of that will be specifically for the native community and how much might be for the non-native community, and what that kind of program interplay might look like?
We're designing initially for natives first. I'm just going to be honest about it. But the hope is to reconnect people in understanding the native tribes of Oregon, the greater Northwest Native Chamber service area, bring native businesses to one place so they know who's a natively owned business. That's a big driver in that. But there will definitely be educational, cultural moments, craft, food. The Indigenous Food Hall, the restaurant, the hotel will be open. The hotel's being set up for conferencing, right, for Indigenous people, but it'll be open for other users to use it. The restaurant will be open. The Indigenous Food Hall, can you imagine a food hall where fresh fish, salmon are brought in, berries, these type of things? These are the opportunities that are out there, and there's going to be ongoing education, because if we don't educate, we have the opportunity to create the same mistakes of the past. Marissa, you want to expand?
Yeah, I think, the goal is, once the kind of programming is finalized, is to really look for those opportunities where non-native folks can interact with the Center for Tribal Nations, as well as the different native businesses. That's a big part of, kind of the goal of some of the economic opportunities in this. Jeff mentioned there's currently only 5 brick and mortar native-owned businesses in Portland. I would guess most people don't know where those are. And so to have something like this where we can really bring attention and highlight the native entrepreneurs that we have in our community, and be able to show and share resources for being able to support those businesses, we hope that really creates opportunities for, dialogue, engagement, teaching, and opportunities to really support those businesses and kind of bring awareness to some of the really amazing work that particularly the Northwest Native Chamber members and the businesses that are associated with that organization. There's already incredible work being done, and we see this as a really good opportunity to be able to highlight and uplift those businesses and allow the opportunities for interaction with non-natives.
That sounds amazing. I know we have a comment in the chat about the food hall, and I concur. That sounds incredible. Um, Another question about data collection. So incorporating neuroaesthetics and evidence-based research and or collecting biofeedback info to determine how these spaces are impacting people emotionally and physically. So how to collect those sort of performance metrics after the fact.
Well,
Yeah.
Marissa,
Go ahead.
you want to start? No, please.
Well, I was just going to say, yes, there is definitely a plan to be able to collect data. We really see this being, a precedent-setting project on a lot of different levels. And so there's nothing like this that exists anywhere in the country, a Center for Tribal Nations that is kind of with the programming and intent that we're trying to do. And so how we can document that and share that process with other Indigenous communities is definitely a goal. But with where we're at currently in our process, we're very much in the kind of feasibility stage, if you will. And so we've taken and documented the vision for this project based off of our collaboration with the advisory committee. And now we're really entering kind of the phase of testing the programming ideas to see what's really viable for this project. And so this is kind of the beginning of that kind of data collection that will continue through the project. Obviously through construction, but especially once the doors open and it's operating, to see what the impact is over time.
And Marissa and I and Northwest Native Chamber leadership were just attending a large economic summit for Native Americans last week. And with that said, I had a deep conversation with an arm of Johns Hopkins University Medical Division that talked about actually, and they have a program already called the Center for Indigenous Health. And they're shaping health programs around what tribal sovereign governments want their communities to learn about health and everything else. One of the most underserved sides of society. But this could be a place that Johns Hopkins has a base in this building as research engagement for tribes of the Northwest. And that could be one of the critical hubs of how this center is used and learned from. So great point. And, those are the opportunities that we see on the horizon.
That's great. So we also have a question about how you're going to get to operational. So can you talk a little bit about the funding and what's going to make this project happen beyond the Metro grant that you already mentioned?
Well, I'm going to be real short here. So we have a rough project budget, $500 to $600 million. We know this is a daunting project. We've had grants to start the planning. We have got a lot of momentum, a lot of engagement. We are going to go to tribal entities, governments, intertribal agencies around the country, and look for stakeholders and where return on investment goes to tribal people. And I'm going to quickly hand that over to Marissa because that is her pillar of expertise, and that's what she's engaged in.
Yeah, and that's really, another opportunity we see for this to be Native owned and led. Having opportunities for tribal governments, tribal enterprises, Native owned businesses to have investment opportunities where that is circulating amongst tribal people is a big part of the economic opportunity we see with this project. We'll definitely be reaching out to different grant opportunities and foundations for donations as well. I think that will also be kind of one of the next phases of this project as we have a lot of fundraising to do that will help us with particularly some of the planning efforts that will be in over this kind of current phase of the project. But the goal and being able to set up kind of the ownership ownership structure and model is to allow this to be an opportunity for tribal investment. We really believe that that is going to be the key for the long-term sustainability of the project, and the only way that it can have the long-term economic impact that we hope it will, so that this Center for Tribal Nations can serve tribal communities, for generations to come.
Great. Thank you so much. So we are now officially 1 minute over time. So we're going to have to break it up. There were a number of other excellent questions in the chat. I would highly recommend sending those questions to Jeff and Marissa for some follow-up. And also there were a number of comments and a lot of just really positive feedback about this project and how exciting it is. So thank you so much, Jeff and Marissa, for taking the time to present to us today. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you all to our attendees for taking a glorious sunny lunch hour in the Portland metro area to sit at a computer and listen to information about this exciting project. So we'll be reconvening the UDP group in April. So look for a post on our topic area for that. We're still working that out, and we would love to see you all there. So thank you again so much, and have a wonderful sunny Tuesday.
Have a great day.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing.
So much.